As we approach the end of 2025, it's clear that Ukraine has a very simple strategy that it's executed with increasing precision as the year has progressed. Take out Russia's oil, along with as much of its gas as possible, and you sap the money that the Kremlin needs to sustain the brutal invasion of Ukraine. Russia has been feeling the impact of Ukraine's strategy all year, and Ukraine just keeps on coming. In another great night for Ukraine, war has erupted deep inside Russia due to Ukraine's long-range weapons once again scoring direct hits on their targets. Vladimir Putin has just received the message loud and clear: nowhere in Russia is safe. On December 17th, the Kyiv Post reported that fires and explosions had occurred all over Russia in the wake of yet another long-range Ukrainian drone strike. Several cities were targeted, with two of the most important being Slaviansk on Kuban and a suburb of Yeysk in Krasnodar Krai during the early hours of the morning. Injuries have been sustained, as the emergency response center that serves the latter city claims. It says that at least 2 people have been injured, with 5 homes also being damaged due to falling drone debris, though it appears that there are no deaths reported yet. These minor casualties weren't Ukraine's goal. Russia's oil and energy infrastructure was what Ukraine intended to hit, and hitting that infrastructure is precisely what Ukraine achieved on December 17th. Ukraine's successful strikes didn't escape the attention of Russia's non-mainstream media, as the Russian military blogger channel SHOT reported on the carnage that Ukraine caused. Citing local civilians, SHOT took to Telegram to explain just how encompassing Ukraine's attack on the Slaviansk district was. Local residents told SHOT that the attack lasted for at least 3 hours. They heard at least 18 explosions. Following the attack, a fire broke out at Slaviansk on Kuban. The channel also said that Russia's Ministry of Defense had claimed that the country's air defense forces managed to destroy 94 Ukrainian drones during the December 17th attack, with the only damage the channel reported being some minor damage to the Slaviansk power grid. So Russia claims that Ukraine's drone assault was unsuccessful. As is so often the case, Russia appears to be lying. Other reports emerging from the locations that Ukraine targeted claim that the country's drones scored direct hits on several targets, including at least one Russian oil refinery that uncoincidentally happens to be in the Slaviansk district, where drones have been sighted. Countering Russia's attempts to conceal the scale of the strike in Slaviansk, Ukraine's general staff also took to Telegram to explain what really happened in Slaviansk on Kuban. Far from a strike that injured a handful of civilians and broke a few windows in apartment buildings, Ukraine's attack targeted an oil refinery that is among the largest in Russia. On the night of December 17, 2025, units of the defense forces used deep strike weapons to strike the infrastructure of the Slaviansk oil refinery in the city of Slaviansk on Kuban in the Krasnodar region of Russia, the general staff confirmed. Before adding, explosions and a fire were also reported in the target area. The extent of damage to the facility is being assessed. The last statement reveals that nobody knows yet if the Slaviansk refinery has been taken offline by Ukraine's drones. However, the general staff accompanied its post with a photograph of that refinery in flames as evidence that Russia suffered from far more than a handful of drone debris incidents during the early hours of December 17th. More evidence of the scale and success of Ukraine's drone assault comes from the Exilanova Plus Telegram channel. The channel posted a pair of videos alongside a single caption reading, "Slaviansk on Kuban. Locals report that the oil refinery is actually on fire." Both of the videos back that claim up. The first, lasting literally 2 seconds, shows the bright light of a blaze captured from what appears to be a field outside of the Slaviansk oil refinery. As for the second, it lasts a little bit longer at 29 seconds, and the clear sound of Russian air defense guns are heard in the background. Toward the end of the video, there's a massive explosion. We don't see the fire that the explosion caused. But putting 2 and 2 together, it's clear that the attack filmed in the second video led to the blaze seen at the Slaviansk oil refinery in the first video and in the general staff's photograph. Assuming that the refinery has just been hit hard by Ukraine, this could be yet another major gunshot delivered to Russia's oil refining sector. In its report on Ukraine's December 17th attack, the Kyiv Independent reveals that the Slaviansk oil refinery processes about 5.2 million tons of crude oil annually, and the fuel and other products that it produces are used by the Russian occupiers inside Ukraine. News Sky also reports on Ukraine's overnight strike, and it revealed that the refinery may be even more important than the Kyiv Independent realizes. The outlet claims that the refinery's capacity is actually 6.25 million tons per year, which is a full million more than the Kyiv Independent claims. Furthermore, the refinery is one of the key nodes of the fuel infrastructure of southern Russia, as the refinery is responsible for about 2% of Russia's total oil refining capacity. Gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel, all of which are used by the Russian military, are made in Slaviansk, and Ukraine has targeted it regularly as a result. This was the latest in a series of attacks that have taken place over the last 1.5 to 2 years, New Sky says. The Kyiv Post offers an extra little detail, noting that Ukraine has hit the Slavansk oil refinery twice already during the latter half of 2025, with attacks being recorded on both August 13th and November 30th. Ukraine will be hoping that this latest strike is enough to shut the refinery down for an extended period. However, we don't know if that's the case until the smoke clears and the scale of the damage caused can be assessed. Another refinery hit would already have meant a great night for Ukraine. However, the country had other targets in mind for its drones, as the Saratov region also ended up in the firing line. At least 10 explosions were heard across Saratov and Engels during the same night as the refinery attack. Though no official reports of damage or casualties have come from either Russia or Ukraine, it's clear why Ukraine would target these two regions. Saratov is the home of another oil refinery, as the Kyiv Post highlights. Ukraine hit that refinery on December 13th, so it may have been going for a double tap during the early hours of December 17th. Owned by Rosneft, the Saratov facility is capable of processing up to 5.8 million tons of oil per year, making it roughly equivalent to the Slaviansk facility that Ukraine's drones just set on fire. Saratov is also a regular target for Ukraine, as it's been hit at least 9 times since the beginning of 2025, with 6 of those strikes coming during the fall. It looks like Ukraine attempted strike number 10, however it may not have been successful this time around. As for Engels, that city is close to the Engels 2 air base, which is one of Russia's most important strategic bomber bases. Russia expanded that base with 12 new aircraft parking stands in October, indicating that it intends to use the base as a launching point for even more of the missiles and glide bombs that it was already sending Ukraine's way from the base. The December 17th strike may have been an attempt by Ukraine to take out some of those stands or to destroy the bombers and fighter jets stationed at the Engels base, but as with the Saratov strike, it's unclear whether Ukraine managed to hit its mark. 10 explosions across these two regions suggest it may have, but there's no official word as of the creation of this video. Ukraine's drones were active elsewhere in Russia too. A small suburb in Krasnodar Krai named Yeysk also seems to have come under fire. The Kyiv Post says that residents reported at least 3 explosions and a big fireball in the sky, the latter likely being the result of Russian air defenses hitting their mark when trying to take out one of the drones. Though the mention of Yeysk being a suburb might make some suspect that Ukraine has civilian targets in mind. The region is home to a seaport that the Kyiv Post claims that Russia uses for the transshipment of fuel and oil products. So another legitimate military target. Perhaps one of the 3 reported explosions were caused by a Ukrainian drone touching down in that seaport. Finally, Ukraine also appears to have sent its drones hurtling into Russia's Rostov region, with its target there being the Nikolaevskaya oil depot. This strike was confirmed by Ukraine's general staff in the Telegram post we mentioned earlier. A hit on the territory of the Nikolaevskaya oil depot and the Rostov region of the Russian Federation was also confirmed. According to preliminary data, the storage tank and the river vessel Captain Gilbert were damaged, the general staff reports. Taking out another oil tank is always good for Ukraine, not least because that means more oil or fuel that Russia might have sold or sent to its troops goes up in flames. As for the Captain Gilbert, there are no further details. It may have been part of the shadow fleet that Ukraine has been targeting with increasing frequency during the second half of 2025. So what we know for sure is that Ukraine managed to hit at least 1 oil refinery, with a second strike falling into the maybe category until we receive more details. One of Russia's oil depots has lost a tank, along with a river ship, and it's possible that Ukraine may have hit the Engels air base and a seaport responsible for transshipment of Russian oil. All in all, a pretty productive night for Ukraine. Not that you'd know if you listened to Russia. We've already mentioned that Russia has claimed that it shot down 94 of Ukraine's drones. The Kyiv Post adds the locations, with 31 of those drones being taken down over Krasnodar Krai, another 22 over Rostov, and 8 in the Saratov region. It doesn't take a maths whiz to realize that this leaves 33 of Ukraine's supposedly destroyed drones unaccounted for, and Russia has a long track record of claiming to have destroyed Ukrainian drones, even as its refineries and military infrastructure burn. The drone debris excuse was also trotted out for the Krasnodar strikes, so it seems likely that Russia is being less than truthful about the effectiveness of its response to Ukraine's early morning raid. By contrast, the few official statements made by Ukraine's general staff seem to be supported by evidence, be that photographs or videos published by open-source intelligence sources. We'll leave it up to you to determine which side is telling the truth about the morning of December 17th. If we assume that it's Ukraine that's providing legitimate information, which the evidence so far supports, then there are a few things that we can conclude from this latest strike. Firstly, it's abundantly clear that Ukraine has no intention of stopping a campaign of attacks on Russian oil refining that have been placing intense pressure on Russia throughout 2025. News Sky highlights that fact in its report on the December 17th strike, as it highlights estimates provided by the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA. The CEPA think tank estimated that between September 2023 and the beginning of 2025, Ukraine carried out about 100 strikes on oil refineries and oil depots in Russia, News Sky reports. That's already an impressive figure, as 100 strikes over less than a year and a half tells us that Ukraine has been exploiting gaps in Russia's air defenses for a long time. However, these numbers don't take the intensification of Ukraine's refinery strikes in 2025 into account. Whatever records Ukraine might have held for refinery strikes before 2025 have been absolutely shattered this year. On December 7th, Euromaidan Press revealed that Ukraine had carried out 180 strikes on Russian oil infrastructure in 2025 up to that point, and the impact of these strikes is clear. The results are measurable, Euromaidan Press reports. Russian refining capacity is down 25%. Moscow has banned gasoline exports through year-end amid 20% domestic fuel shortage. Rosneft, Russia's oil giant, reported a 70% collapse in net income for the first 9 months of 2025, falling to $3.57 billion. Speaking to CNN, the global head of commodity strategy at RBC Capital's Markets, Halima Croft, explains what Ukraine is trying to achieve with its refinery attacks. I think the general strategy since summer is the idea that you cannot allow Russia to retain so much of its critical energy revenue that has been fueling the massive manpower recruitment advantage that Moscow has over Ukraine, Croft says. That seems like a reasonable conclusion, and Ukraine has only been hitting Russia's refineries harder as we approach the end of 2025. On December 1st, the Moscow Times revealed that Ukraine had broken its monthly record for refinery strikes by hitting at least 14 during November. It also points out that Russia's refining volume has dropped by between 300,000 and 500,000 barrels of oil per day. Granted, Russia still refines 5 million barrels per day, but in a campaign of 1,000 cuts, Ukraine has inflicted the first few dozen, and it's proving that it's going to keep sending drones and missiles into Russia with increasing frequency as the war moves into 2026. What used to be the occasional strike meant to cause damage has become a sustained effort to keep refineries from ever fully stabilizing, writes Kepler senior refining analyst Nikhil Dubey. And that's the point. When strikes happen at a rate of around 1 every 2 days, it takes a lot longer for Russia to carry out the repairs its refineries need to get them back to full refining capacity. And as long as that capacity is dropping, Russia makes less money and can't get as much fuel to soldiers who are launching dozens of assaults against Ukraine's defenses every day. Russia's long-range drones target Ukraine's civilians ahead of its military infrastructure. Ukraine takes the opposite approach, and it's clear that strikes like the one on December 17th are bearing fruit. News Sky adds that CEPA believes that Ukraine's campaign, not only against refining but all Russian oil, gas, and energy, is a direct attempt by Ukraine to turn off the valve on Russia's military economy. Beyond the refinery strikes, Ukraine is hitting depots, as it did on December 17th, along with fuel and lubricant warehouses. Whenever these stored products go up in flames, Russia's wartime logistics descend into chaos. Rerouting becomes the priority, and Russia rarely gets its act together quickly enough to ensure that its soldiers in Ukraine have the fuel they need to sustain the volume of assaults that Putin demands. That's one of the reasons why Russia is now relying on small infiltration teams that operate on foot. Even when those teams have access to mechanized units and armor, which isn't always a given, they often don't have the fuel they need to use those units. The soldiers march into Ukraine's kill zones. Over 1.19 million Russian casualties, as reported by Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, speak for themselves. However, Ukraine's bombardments of Russian refineries and other military targets do more than deprive the Russian war machine of the money and fuel that it needs to operate correctly. Think about the videos that we mentioned earlier. Both were shot by Russian citizens whose lives were disrupted by the sounds of drones flying overhead, air defenses rattling off rounds, and massive explosions that led to facilities close to their homes going up in flames. Ukraine's strikes don't just have a tangible impact on Russia's military, they have a psychological impact on the country's people. A separate effect is psychological and political. Russian society is increasingly seeing videos of burning warehouses, refineries, and military units in regions that until recently were considered the deep rear, News Sky reports. The Kremlin is still trying to maintain the charade that everything is under control, as demonstrated by its reports on Ukraine's attacks, always claiming that every drone was shot down and that any damage recorded was recorded by debris rather than direct hits. Believe us, not the evidence of your own eyes and ears, the Kremlin says to its own people. But with each successful Ukrainian strike resulting in footage being shared all over Russia via platforms like Telegram, the Kremlin facade is slipping. Ukraine has brought a war that Putin said would be long over by now to Russia. Russia's people are starting to get tired and increasingly frightened of the fight that their president started. It's difficult to prove that with reliable statistics that highlight the general mood in Russia, which is a byproduct of millions of unhappy people living in an authoritarian state in which speaking out can lead to a spell in the gulags. Still, there are hints that everyday Russians are getting sick of the war. In July, Russia Post revealed that 50% of respondents to a June survey that asked whether peace talks should be held with Ukraine said yes. Only 39% of the people said they wanted to see the continuation of Putin's supposed special military operation. Saying yes to the concept of peace talks is a relatively safe way for everyday Russians to tell the Kremlin that they want the war to end, especially as Putin is openly expressing his alleged desire to end the war he started via such talks. Time magazine also offers more clues about the collective Russian state of mind in an October 3rd article where it asks the question, are Russians really happy? On the surface, the answer seems to be yes, as the Levada Center poll reveals that only 11% of Russians claim to be dissatisfied with their lives. That's apparently the lowest figure since surveys began in 1993. But something seems a little off about the numbers. These legions of supposedly happy Russians appear to be surviving on an ever-growing diet of antidepressants, as Time reveals. To bear the long years of authoritarian rule, it seems Russians have actively turned to antidepressants, the magazine says. Sales of the anti-fear pills have been brisk, 13 million packets in 2022, 15 million packets in 2023, 16 million in 24. In the first half of 25, it's already over 9 million. Assuming those sales figures stay consistent, that will mean 18 million pills sold by the end of the year, representing a 2 million increase over the 2024 sale figures. Russians are happy. Perhaps not as much as they claim, and that's precisely the feeling that Ukraine wants to inspire in the Russian people. Unhappy Russians equals pressure on Putin. And when faltering military displays, burning refineries, and more rubles being lost compound that pressure, Ukraine may just find a way to win the war without having to destroy every single Russian soldier that enters its territory. While it waits for these pressure tactics to pay off, Ukraine is getting more ambitious with its long-range strikes. On December 17th, Newsweek reported that a December 14th attack on an oil rig in the Caspian Sea led to the full shutdown of 14 oil wells. You can find out more about that attack and how Ukraine pulled it off in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest attacks on the Russian deep rear. And thank you for watching.